Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for October 27th, 2023. Well, I received very few questions this week, and I attribute that mainly to the fact that I think we've had very few views on Facebook. Why? Who knows? Is it shadow banning? Is it posting it where no one can find it? I've received some emails from people who say they haven't been able to find the updates recently. One place you can always find them is at the LaRoucheOrganization.com. I don't know what we can do about the problems with the websites that don't post them where they should be, don't send out notifications. However, 5 days a week, you can always find my updates at the LaRoucheOrganization.com. Now, I think the two questions I did receive that I will address are pretty important ones. The first one has to do with the situation in the Middle East or Southwest Asia. Many of you have asked, do I believe that this was an intelligence failure, that the Israelis were unable to get advanced warning of the attack by Hamas and that Hamas really caught them by surprise? Well, it's hard to know. I do know that Israeli intelligence is well-funded, it's highly competent, it's dedicated to its mission. On the other hand, the administration of Netanyahu may have a different intent. So I can rely on some people who have a better view of these things. One person who has a very interesting view is Scott Ritter, the former weapons inspector and very articulate and well-informed former intelligence officer. What Ritter said is that it's a combination of Israeli arrogance, too much reliance on technical capabilities, and an underestimation of Hamas. Now, all of those factors are probably true. There's definitely an arrogance in Israel that they can control the situation, that everything was under their direction. Also that they completely gave over not completely, but largely intended to keep an eye on the situation with technology, with satellites and other kind of capabilities. And then you have the aspect of the underestimation of Hamas. You hear it from what the people in the IDF are saying. They're calling them beasts, they're calling them animals. Well, can beasts or animals come up with a plan to break out of such a tightly controlled situation? Well, all of that's possible. Ritter's analysis is fairly thorough and fairly compelling. But then you have to ask the question, who benefited from the surprise attack by Hamas? It's clear that one factor here is that Benjamin Netanyahu is in big trouble. He's been indicted, he's facing trial. He could be not only removed as prime minister, but go to jail. In response to that, he ran an operation to reform the judiciary, which created a tremendous turmoil against him inside Israel, bringing out hundreds of thousands into the streets. And the domestic opposition to him is quite significant. Now, at the same time, there's a shift in world opinion against colonialism and the idea that the Israeli control over Gaza, while it's not a complete control, Israel's not inside Gaza, but the ability to control it is complete. It's a form of colonialism. Some call it apartheid. And that this is, the world opinion is shifting against this, especially with the emergence in the global South of national leaders who are opposed to the conditions that were bequeathed to them at the end of the Second World War. Now, you also have the factor of Netanyahu playing a role in building up Hamas. Now, the way he did that was with money, with turning the other way, to creating a circumstance where the Palestinian people in Gaza would reject the Palestinian Authority, which has proven to be somewhat weak, and instead would gravitate toward a well-funded Hamas when the people needed things, when they needed help, when they needed protection, when they needed food and jobs. Now, that's not unimportant. The estimates are that the Israelis provided close to $1 billion in aid to Hamas to build them up. Netanyahu bragged about it. It was in the media repeatedly. And so you have that as an aspect. And why would Netanyahu build them up? Because he opposes the idea of a two-state solution. If you have a national leadership of Hamas that's unified, as a national leadership must be, then it would present a very strong alternative to continued control, the strings being controlled from the outside. And so by building up Hamas against the Palestinian Authority, you create an opportunity to keep the Palestinians under control. Now, at the same time, you have Netanyahu's support base, including very strongly the settlers movement. And to defeat the idea of a two-state solution, Israeli settlements are springing up everywhere on land that technically is Palestinian land. And therefore, it reduces the amount of contiguous land area that could form a state. And so this is what the Israelis refer to as facts on the ground, that the idea of a two-state solution doesn't make sense when one state has no contiguous land area. So you put those things together, and you certainly do come to the conclusion that Netanyahu has been the beneficiary of this attack. On the other hand, he's also on the wrong end of the stick on this. How did he allow this to happen? How come his government was not prepared for this? Now, Netanyahu himself said there will be an investigation after Hamas is destroyed. Well, we've seen these investigations before, such as the 9/11 Commission, the Warren Commission. Whenever you have these kinds of failed intelligence or false flags, the investigation that comes out afterwards very often either underplays the control at the top or completely covers it up. So I'm not sure we'll get an answer, but certainly this situation has been convenient for Netanyahu and also for the neocons, the hardcore war supporters in the Republican Party, who are trying to take the party back from the MAGA Republicans, from those who are saying we should be concerned with domestic policy and not with being policemen of the world. So there are a lot of loose ends to tie up. In the meantime, what's clear is that the new Speaker of the House is, even though he's tied to Trump, is going along with the idea that we have to fund both the Israelis against Hamas and Ukraine against Russia. And so we'll see more in the days to come. But what's necessary is a continued mobilization of those who oppose the idea of these never-ending wars to force the issue that the global cartels cannot dictate policy to government. And it is the cartels that are supporting this because their bread and butter comes from the idea of a unipolar world where the end result is the money coming to the corporate cartels. So the second related question that I got is, where's the BRICS new currency? How come they haven't moved ahead more rapidly? This is a tough one for people to get because the idea of changing a monetary system overnight is difficult because you have so many elements involved. For example, if you were to have a full-scale debt moratorium in the West, what happens to those people whose pensions are in speculative instruments? You're going to throw them onto the human scrap heap? What happens to countries that have no internal ability to generate credit? So what you hear from the Russians and especially the Chinese is that there's a transition phase going on, moving from one system which is not working, which is based on the old imperial idea of paying obeisance to the corporate cartels. There's a transition from that to a new system based on the idea of sovereign states working on multilateral agreements, moving toward national and regional currency blocks, and new development banks to actually fund physical production, as opposed to serve as agencies of collection of debt for the largest bankrupt cartels. So what Xi and Putin and others have said is you can't rush into things. You have to have a stable situation, you need to have a commitment to mutually beneficial investment. Therefore, you need banks which are capable of generating credit for production. The use of national currencies can serve as the basis for turning debt into an instrument for investment. And this goes back to the American system, what Hamilton did to turn the American debt from the Revolutionary War into credit for physical goods production, for infrastructure, and so on. So this is underway. It's taking place. So the question that people have is, why isn't it happening quicker? Well, it's probably a good thing that they're taking the time because you want to get it right. And what Russia and China are concerned about is, even though they know the Western establishment is gunning for them. In the case of Russia, it's very clear the funding of the Ukraine war is designed to weaken Russia so that they can bring down the Putin government and move in and grab up the raw material wealth of Russia. So even as that's going on, the Russians are saying they want a partnership with the West. The same thing that the Chinese are saying. The problem is from the West. The European Union is committed to this idea of de-risking relationship with China, which means not being tied up in investments with China. Even though, for example, China is either the leading or one of the leading trade partners of most of the nations of Europe. The problem here is that as long as the United States and the City of London are calling the shots, they have no desire or no interest in moving away from the current unipolar order, even though they know it's bankrupt. It cannot be saved. But they're willing to try, even if it means putting the world in the conditions where nuclear war is a real possibility. So what's needed here, the same thing that's needed to stop these wars. You need a movement in the West which recognizes that the interest of people in the United States and Europe is not more war, not trying to force countries to submit to a unipolar order or a rules-based order, as Blinken calls it, but to work with the nations of the Global South for mutually beneficial projects, which include especially energy, transportation, healthcare, the kind of infrastructure that's needed for a nation to leapfrog into the modern world and take care of the growing populations in countries of Africa, as opposed to the Malthusian policies coming out of the World Bank, the IMF, the World Economic Forum, and the likes of King Charles. So it's taking some time. The main thing that will speed it up is if you work with us and win people over to understand what win-win cooperation means. If you understand why it is that the economic development policies drafted and proposed by Lyndon LaRouche over decades represent the best way for not only the integration of East and West and North and South, but for the people of all sovereign nation states. Unless we have an approach like that, you end up with some form of autarky or chaos and plunge right back into wars. So I would urge people, study the ideas of LaRouche. I'm going to once again connect with the description page, give you a link for the fundamental principles for economic cooperation that Helga Zepp-LaRouche drafted. Study them, think about them, organize for them. That's the way we get out of this situation without having a mass annihilation of the population of the earth. So thanks for joining me this week. Share this video, share all of our videos, work with your friends to get discussion groups going on philosophical conceptions regarding the nature of man and the kinds of institutions that represent the interests of all human beings. So I'll see you again next week. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.